Hello again. This is Will Luden, your host at Revolution 2.0, a revolution of the heart. Bring you this episode, today's episode, which is passing as a POC, passing as a person of color. And together, we are at episode 384. And I mean together. It's been a long road, and we have a long, fun road in front of us. Giving advantage to people today because they are slightly or completely non-white is just as wrong as it was when we were taking people who were partially or completely non-white and giving them huge disadvantages, whether it was having to use a different water fountain or making them into slaves. Both are wrong. Both are blatantly racist, and neither has a place in either our hearts or in our country. In the ugly racist past, if someone was in any part black, they were considered all black for purposes of giving advantage to the whites and disadvantage to the person who was of color, who was partly or completely of color. It was a clean sweep. You were either white and you were a good guy, or you were partially or completely non-white, or in the southern states, black, and you were a bad guy. And they even had names for your fraction of offending blackness. If you were half black, you were a mulatto. If you were a quarter black, you were a quadroon. If you were an eighth black, you were an octoroon. If you were a 16th black, you were hexadexaroon. And that's me. And we'll wrap around that. And it was cruel and awful and a continuing stain on our country. We've gotten past it, but there's a stain there. On the other hand, no matter what percentage of black blood you had, if you looked enough white, sufficiently white, that you could pass as white, that was a huge advantage. You were then treated as white, unless somebody could find out you. But if you looked white, you were treated as white. Appearances were everything. And for many people today who want to flip that, appearances are still everything. So today, if you have the slightest amount of non-white features, that's the plus. Used to be the slightest amount or a lot of non-white features was a huge negative. Now it's a plus, and people are taking advantage of that. And it's just as wrong and just as unfair to flip the racial preferences and make them into what we're looking at today, where being a POC is a good thing, person of color, as opposed to where being a person of color in the past was a bad thing. We're not fixing the evil by flipping it. We're simply extending it. Let me tell you, it's one of my favorite Star Trek episodes, and it's certainly an illustrative. 1969, Captain Kirk and Mr. Scott are running around the universe in the Star Trek, in the Starship Enterprise, and they come across the planet Charon, where everybody there has black and white faces. The difference is that one group is black, a vertical line. One group is black on one side, white on the other. The other group is white on one side and black on the other. The group that was black on their right side, white on the left, felt justifiably and completely superior to the group that was white on the right side and black on the left. And this led to the same kind of racial hatred, extended racial hatred, that we experienced in the South, in the slave years, and in the Jim Crow years. And Captain Kirk and the rest of the crew were stunned, frustrated, angry, nonplussed. What's up with that? And that's all it is a color flip. And we should be just as stunned and just as angry and just as confused and just as over it as the Star Trek crew was, the Starship Enterprise crew was, because that's what we're doing. We're flipping black and white. That's all we are doing, is flipping black and white and somehow thinking that we're fixing things. And That's absurd. And this kind of absurdity extends. And you'll see absurdities breeding absurdities. For example, you have a white woman, Rachel Dolezal, born of white parents, who decided she could pass as POC because passing as POC is a good thing now, where it used to be passing as white was the good thing. And both of them are just silly. But she passed as a person of color sufficiently that she became an NAACP chapter president, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People president. And she was pure white and faked being a POC. Speaking of faking, you have Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, who sought advantage in pretending to be a POC, a person of color, by pretending that she had Native American blood, which she did not. And this helped her in her legal and academic career as well as in her political career. And it gets even more, it's even more bizarre. Here you have the case of George Zimmerman, a young man of mixed race who killed a young black man. The story there is, and he was accused of murder. But he did not murder. He was acquitted. What the story is, a young man of color kills in a justified fashion another young man of color. But there's too many who couldn't stand that particular narrative. So they invented a new term, white Mexican, and applied it to George Zimmerman. So white Mexican, where did that come from? Well, it came from an agenda. It came from the identity group, the identity stack agenda. So then they dropped Mexican, so the story became white man murders black man. And there's a lot of twisting and a lot of painful, awkward, embarrassing twisting to get you from person of color justifiably kills another person of color to white man murders black man. And then we've got President Biden and Kamala Harris in this one. When President Biden was running for office, he said, I'm going to pick a black female as my running mate. Used to be that either black or female as a vice president was the kiss of death. Now somehow it's wonderful. Both are wrong. And so he picks Kamala Harris to be his running mate, and now Miss Harris is the vice president of the United States. I suppose being half black and all female qualified her. But the voters didn't think she was qualified because she failed quickly in the Democratic primary, not even getting double-digit support from her voters in her home state of California. So what we need to do is get over ranking groups and making this into identity politics. And flipping the groups doesn't do anything good. All it does is take a past evil and continue the evil in a different way. What we need to start doing is recognizing that all of the groups have different strengths and different weaknesses, and use the strengths over here to shore up the weaknesses over there, and vice versa. For example, men and women have different strengths and weaknesses. Overall, men and women are not the same. Much of us are the same, but there are some strong differences, and we use those differences to use these strengths to shore weaknesses over here, and vice versa. And that's how we get 1 + 1 + 1 = 15. That's how we get to the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Recognize the differences, honor them, and embrace them. Forget the identity stack, the preference stack. And here's a fun closing thought. I'm going to do a little reading directly from the piece of paper here because I want to make sure I get these names and percentages right. 7 Native American tribes, including the Fort Sill Apache tribe and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians of South Carolina, see you as qualified for membership if you are a 1/16th blood match. 23 tribes, including the Ottawa tribe of Oklahoma, Peoria tribe of Indians, and the entire Seminole Nation, will consider you if you have any sort of Native American lineage. any sort, 1/16 in some cases, any Native American blood in other cases. Using their criteria, not my criteria, using their criteria, I'm a person of color because I'm 1/14 black. But that's silly. It would be silly and wrong for me to run around trying to seek advantage saying I'm a person of color, like running for office as a person of color or trying to get other benefits. It's silly and wrong. So is the whole person of color thing, whether we see them as less than or greater than. It's just wrong. We all have the personal responsibility to turn our backs on identity politics and to embrace the strengths and weaknesses, the strengths that overcome the weaknesses, embrace and honor and use to our advantages the differences. We have that personal responsibility. And speaking of personal responsibility, this is not standalone. It's one of the two main tenets here at Revolution 2.0. Tenet number one is personal responsibility. Take it, teach it. Number two, the two basic principles. The second basic principle is be your brother's keeper. The answer to the age-old question, am I my brother's keeper, is a ringing absolute yes. There is no other answer. So what are you going to do? Remember, it doesn't matter where you stand if you don't do anything. And you can take positive, effective action today by subscribing and encouraging others to subscribe with you. And if you're enjoying this on YouTube, hit the bell so you'll be notified of new episodes and hit that like button. And remember, whatever you do, do it in love. Whatever I do, whatever you do, whatever we do it in love. Because without that, anything we do is empty.
You've been listening to Revolution 2.0. If you've enjoyed this stimulating, passionate, and relentless reasoning, we encourage you to get out there and do something. Follow Will Luden and learn more at revolution2-0.org.